What drives a devoted mother of two to secretly plan her escape? And what happens when the man she fears finds out too late? This is the chilling unraveling of Melissa Carter's final days. Melissa Carter was the kind of woman neighbors described as the sweetest soul you'd ever meet. At 35, she was the mother of two beautiful children, Aiden, 6, and Lily, just 3. She lived in the leafy Green Acres suburb of Spokane, Washington, where she worked as a dental office manager and spent weekends baking, volunteering at church, and quietly, painfully planning her escape. Melissa's husband, Eric Carter, wasn't just any man in town. He was a decorated firefighter. Locals praised him as a hero, someone who ran into burning homes while others ran out. But behind closed doors, the truth was far darker. Eric was controlling. Over the years, the charming firefighter had become something far more sinister. A master manipulator, emotionally abusive, and financially tyrannical. Melissa wasn't allowed to have her own credit card. Eric monitored her phone. Friends said they hadn't seen her alone in public in months. "I think she just learned to live small," said Dana McCall, Melissa's childhood best friend. Like, she knew that if she stayed quiet, she'd survive another day. But that wasn't living. Melissa's secret rebellion started with a phone call to a divorce attorney hidden under the contact name Maggie D. Hare. Each Tuesday afternoon, she slipped away on her lunch break, pretending to run errands, but in reality, she was building a legal lifeline. Her journal, discovered later, told the story of a woman who was gaslit to the brink. One entry read, "He makes me feel crazy for needing space. He says I'm lucky to have him. I just want to breathe again." She wrote about the kids. How she was terrified they were starting to notice things. Aiden had begun asking, "Why is Daddy so mad all the time?" Lily clung to Melissa's legs whenever Eric walked in the room. Melissa knew she couldn't wait much longer. By early spring, Melissa had a plan: file for divorce, gain full custody, and move in temporarily with her sister in Coeur d'Alene. She even had a new apartment picked out just across the Idaho border, small but safe. Her attorney advised her to file discreetly and let the paperwork reach Eric through formal channels. It was the safest way, she was told. March 12th was the day. That morning, Melissa dressed for work like normal, a soft cream blouse, jeans, and a silver necklace Aiden had made her with plastic beads. She kissed her kids goodbye and said she'd pick them up by 6. Then, she walked into her lawyer's office and signed the papers that would officially end a 10-year marriage. It was the bravest thing she had ever done. She didn't tell Eric. Not yet. That night, she made spaghetti for the kids. Eric worked a late shift, and for the first time in months, the house felt quiet, almost calm. She called her sister that night. "It's done," she whispered. "I finally did it." But that calm would not last. Because 2 days later, Melissa Carter would vanish. And no one, not her children, not her friends, not even her attorney, would hear from her again. How does a mother vanish without a trace, mid-routine, broad daylight, and leave behind her car, her purse, and her children waiting? The answer starts unraveling here. Wednesday, March 14th, 2023, began like any other day for Melissa Carter. The Pacific Northwest sky was its usual overcast gray as she clocked out of Evergreen Dental Associates in Spokane at exactly 5:12 p.m. A security camera above the entrance caught her walking to her car in the lot, shoulders tense, her usual soft smile absent. That would be the last time anyone would ever see her alive. Melissa's daily routine was as predictable as a metronome. Leave work, pick up Aiden and Lily from their longtime babysitter, Mrs. Della Moran, by 5:45, and be home by 6:15. But that evening, she never showed. At 6:03, Della texted her, "Hey hon, everything okay?" No response. At 6:28, she tried calling. Straight to voicemail. That's when Della called Eric. Eric Carter's tone, according to police transcripts, was cold. He told Della, "She probably went out. You know how dramatic she gets." Della later said the remark chilled her. "I told him, Eric, the kids are still here. She never just goes out without them." And he just said, "I'll handle it." Eric didn't report Melissa missing until noon the next day. And when he did, his statement to Spokane PD raised immediate red flags. He told officers Melissa had been under stress and probably needed a break. That she talked about running away to clear her head. He even added, she's done this kind of thing before. But Melissa's sister, her friends, even her employer confirmed Melissa had never once gone off the grid. Ever. The Spokane Police Department opened a missing persons case. And things escalated quickly when, at 8:45 p.m. that evening, Melissa's silver Honda Accord was found abandoned in the parking lot of a Safeway on Sprague Avenue, just 11 minutes from her work and nowhere near the babysitter's home. The details were disturbing. The car was unlocked. Her keys still hung in the ignition. Her purse, neatly zipped, rested on the front passenger seat, untouched. Inside, police found her wallet, her phone, and a container of spaghetti she'd packed for dinner. The driver's seat was still adjusted to her height. There were no signs of a struggle inside the vehicle. No fingerprints beyond hers and her children's. No broken glass. No blood. But something was undeniably wrong. Detectives canvassed the Safeway parking lot and pulled security footage. They were stunned by what they didn't find. There was no footage of Melissa ever entering the store or exiting the vehicle. In fact, according to timestamps, the car had been parked there since 5:27 p.m., just 15 minutes after she left work. But no one had seen her get out. Meanwhile, Eric's behavior became even stranger. In interviews with detectives, he appeared unfazed. He didn't cry, didn't ask about search efforts, didn't volunteer to help. He repeated the same line, "She's probably just hiding out." When asked where she might have gone, he shrugged. "Beats me." Detective Carla Jennings of Spokane PD later told local media, "It was like talking to someone who'd lost a phone, not a wife." Friends and family were devastated and furious. Melissa's sister, Rachel, went on KXOI Spokane the following day in tears. She didn't run off. She loved those kids. She'd never leave them. Something happened to her, and I think we all know who's responsible. But the department needed more than gut instinct. They needed evidence. And slowly it began to surface. Eric's cell phone data revealed he hadn't stayed home the night of Melissa's disappearance, as he'd initially claimed. Between 7:44 and 9:58 p.m., his phone was pinging off towers near their neighborhood, but on the move. Police asked where he'd gone. "Just driving," Eric answered. "Clearing my head." Then came a call from a neighbor, Mrs. Lorna Vega, who lived just 2 doors down. She'd heard a scream 2 nights earlier, Monday evening. She told police she almost called 911, but assumed it was just another argument. She remembered it clearly because it was so sudden. It wasn't a fight, it was a single high-pitched scream. And then, nothing. Now detectives were connecting the dots. Melissa filed for divorce on Monday. A scream was heard that night. By Wednesday, she was gone. What happens when the perfect husband story starts falling apart? When every excuse, every word, is suddenly betrayed by hard evidence. Investigators were about to find out. By day 4 of the investigation, the public was starting to pay attention. News outlets across Washington state began picking up the story. Spokane mother of 2 missing under mysterious circumstances. Photos of Melissa smiling with her children, holding birthday cupcakes, flashed across TV screens. Her disappearance gripped the community. A mother gone without a trace. A car left behind. A husband acting oddly unconcerned. Inside the Spokane Police Department, lead investigator Detective Carla Jennings and her team were already zeroing in on Eric Carter. At first glance, Eric's story seemed plausible, vague, but not overtly suspicious. He said Melissa was under stress, that she probably ran off. But as the hours ticked by, it became harder to believe he didn't know more. So detectives started pulling threads. They requested security footage from neighboring homes on Sycamore Lane, where the Carters lived in a modest 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch and overgrown backyard. A doorbell camera from across the street provided the first major break. At 7:42 p.m. on the night Melissa vanished, Eric Carter was seen leaving the house. He got into his black Ford F-150 and pulled out of the driveway, alone. He returned at 10:01 p.m. That contradicted his initial statement that he'd been home all night, grieving. When confronted with the footage, Eric didn't flinch. He simply shrugged. "I was driving around, thinking." But investigators were done accepting vague answers. They obtained a warrant to search the Carter home and property. The first thing that struck them was the smell. "There was this faint, almost chemical scent in the garage," said one officer on the scene. The garage had recently been cleaned, too clean. Bleach bottles were found under the sink, and the concrete floor had been scrubbed in streaks. Luminol tests revealed a splatter pattern near the garage wall. Forensics later confirmed it was Melissa's blood. Further analysis showed drag marks, microscopic but consistent, leading from the door connecting the garage to the backyard. Then came the phone records. Eric's phone showed multiple location pings near a construction site the same night he claimed to be just driving. But more disturbing were his internet searches in the weeks leading up to Melissa's disappearance. Can bleach remove DNA? How long does it take for a body to decompose underground? Where to hide a body in Washington state? He'd even searched how to fake a missing person report. But Eric insisted it was all circumstantial. "I watch crime shows," he said during questioning. "Doesn't mean I did anything." Detectives weren't buying it, and neither was the public. Social media exploded with theories. A local Reddit thread titled #WhereIsMelissa gained over 30,000 followers in 2 days. Users posted drone footage of the Carter home. TikTok sleuths broke down timelines. One user went viral after noticing a patch of the Carter backyard looked oddly new. And then another neighbor came forward. Paul Jensen, who lived directly behind the Carters, told police he'd seen Eric in the backyard late at night just days before Melissa vanished. "He was digging," Paul said. "I assumed it was for a garden or something. But he had a wheelbarrow and a big roll of black tarp. It was weird. I mentioned it to my wife because it was cold that night." With mounting evidence and conflicting stories, detectives obtained a second warrant, this time to excavate the Carter backyard. That's when things went from suspicious to horrifying. What secrets lie just beneath the surface, hidden in plain sight? Investigators were about to uncover the truth buried in the Carter backyard, and it would haunt them forever. It was just past 7:30 a.m. on a chilly March morning when Spokane police returned to the Carter residence, this time with a search team, forensic analysts, and a cadaver dog named Roxy. The quiet suburban street was sealed off with yellow tape as neighbors peered from windows and porches, whispering. The energy was thick with dread. Detectives had one target, the backyard. From the start, something about it seemed off. Satellite images pulled from Google Earth showed an old concrete patio at the back of the house, worn, cracked, sun-bleached. But now, in person, that section looked new. The gravel was lighter, the concrete fresher. A 6-by-4-foot area had clearly been recently poured. A poor job, too, rushed and uneven. It took less than 5 minutes for Roxy, the cadaver dog, to alert. She barked, pawed frantically at the corner of the stone slab, and sat down, tail stiff, ears forward. Her handler confirmed the worst, human decomposition. Detectives marked the area and immediately began excavation. Neighbors gathered behind the police perimeter as crews used jackhammers to break through the thin layer of concrete. The air was tense, the silence broken only by the hammering and scraping of tools. 3 feet down, beneath a layer of gravel and tarp, they found her, wrapped in thick black plastic, duct tape around the wrists, ankles, and neck. She was curled in the fetal position, her wedding ring still on, blonde strands of hair matted with blood. It was Melissa Carter. Everyone on site froze. Even the most seasoned officers turned away. One crime scene tech later told reporters, "I have kids of my own. Seeing her like that, it felt like evil." The official autopsy would later reveal Melissa had died from blunt force trauma to the skull, followed by manual strangulation. The medical examiner concluded that she likely died the night of March 12th, just hours after she filed for divorce. Her time of death, somewhere between 9 p.m. and midnight. The journal entries, the secret visits to her attorney, the fear she had confided in her friends, it all led to this moment. Inside the tarp, detectives found 2 more heartbreaking details. A photograph of Melissa holding her children at Christmas, stained with blood, and a crumpled note, barely legible, with a single sentence in her handwriting: "If anything happens to me, it was Eric." News of the discovery spread like wildfire. By noon, every major network in Washington and beyond was reporting. Breaking: body of missing Spokane woman found in husband's backyard. The court of public opinion slammed shut. Eric Carter was arrested that afternoon, barefoot, still wearing the Navy FD Spokane hoodie he'd used to charm neighbors and press alike. Reporters caught a glimpse of him as he was escorted out in cuffs. His face? Blank. No remorse. No fear. In the police interrogation room, when confronted with the evidence, Eric said only one thing: "She made me look like the bad guy." He refused to confess. But he didn't need to. The mountain of evidence had become undeniable. Security footage placing him away from the home the night Melissa disappeared. Forensic evidence of her blood in the garage. Internet searches about body disposal. The shallow grave in his own backyard. And now, Melissa's body, silent, but speaking volumes. Detective Jennings, who had led the investigation from the start, said in a press briefing, "Melissa did everything right. She tried to escape safely. She sought help. But evil doesn't let go easily. We failed to protect her in time, but we will make sure her story is never buried." As Melissa's remains were taken away, neighbors lined the street with candles and flowers. A memorial of teddy bears, handwritten notes, and photos grew along the Carter fence line. Her children, Aiden and Lily, were placed in emergency custody with Melissa's sister Rachel. They never saw their father again. He thought he could silence her forever. But in court, Melissa Carter's voice came roaring back. Through her words, her family, and the brutal truth he never thought would be exposed. The trial of Eric Carter began on October 2, 2023, inside the packed Spokane County Superior Court. It was one of the most highly publicized murder cases in the state that year. Outside the courthouse, news vans lined the streets. Inside, a quiet storm was building. Eric entered wearing a tailored gray suit, clean-shaven, expressionless. He looked nothing like the man the world now knew. Not the father, not the firefighter, not the hero, but the accused killer who buried his wife in the yard behind their children's swing set. He pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder. Prosecutors called it a calculated act of control and rage. "This was not a crime of passion," said lead prosecutor Michelle Reyes in her opening statement. "It was a punishment." Melissa Carter tried to leave, and for that, Eric Carter made sure she never would. The defense, led by attorney John Lemons, attempted to paint a different picture. They claimed there was no direct evidence of Eric committing the act. That Melissa's death, while tragic, was unproven in terms of motive or method. The prosecution, Lemons said, wants you to believe a husband grieving in his own way is guilty of murder. But what followed destroyed any doubt. The state laid out a crushing timeline, step by step. First, the security footage Eric's movements on the night Melissa vanished, leaving home for nearly 2.5 hours, contradicting his earlier statements. Next came forensic testimony. Melissa's blood had been found on the garage wall and floor, even in the tire treads of Eric's truck. Luminol revealed splatter patterns consistent with blunt force trauma. DNA confirmed it was hers. But the most damning moment came when Detective Carla Jennings took the stand and played audio from Eric's police interrogation. His tone, dismissive. His language, cold. "She made me look like the bad guy," he'd said. The courtroom was silent. Then, Melissa's sister Rachel was called to testify. Holding back tears, she approached the witness stand with a small brown leather notebook. Melissa's journal. "She told me to keep it if anything ever happened to her," Rachel said, her voice shaking. And then, with permission from the court, she read aloud Melissa's final entries. "I'm scared. He's getting worse. If I leave, he'll snap. He told me once, if you try to take the kids, I'll make sure no one ever finds you. I don't want to believe him, but I do." The jury sat frozen, some visibly crying. Even seasoned reporters, used to courtrooms and criminal trials, later said it was one of the most heartbreaking moments they had ever witnessed. After 2 weeks of testimony, over 30 witnesses, and reams of forensic evidence, the jury deliberated for just 4 hours. On October 18, 2023, Eric Carter was found guilty of first-degree murder. As the verdict was read, Eric sat motionless. He showed no emotion. But behind him, Melissa's family wept, both in sorrow and relief. At sentencing, Judge Marisol Grant delivered a searing statement. You were supposed to be her protector. Instead, you became her executioner. This was not love. This was control. And your punishment will reflect the horror of what you've done. Eric Carter was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted into quiet sobs. Melissa's children were not present, but her sister later told reporters, when they're old enough, they'll know their mother was brave. They'll know she tried to fight. Melissa had filed for divorce quietly, but in court, her truth screamed from the pages of her journal, her blood, and the grave Eric built to hide his guilt. Melissa Carter's life was stolen, but not her legacy. From her tragic end, a movement was born, one that's saving women from the very fate she feared most. In the months following Eric Carter's conviction, the city of Spokane, once paralyzed by grief and shock, began to breathe again. But the air still carried the memory of a woman who tried to escape, who cried out through journal pages, and whose silence became a scream that echoed far beyond Washington. Melissa Carter's name didn't vanish after the verdict. Instead, it ignited a fire. Her sister, Rachel Donovan, became the flamekeeper. Within 6 weeks of the sentencing, Rachel launched the Carter Foundation for Domestic Survivors, headquartered just across the state line in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, where Melissa had planned to start a new life. The foundation's mission was urgent and clear: provide immediate, discreet resources for victims of domestic abuse, especially those in the process of separating from their abusers. The foundation offered legal aid, emergency shelter placements, trauma counseling, and a 24/7 hotline staffed by survivors and advocates. Its motto was Melissa's final words: "If anything happens to me, it was him." Donations poured in, first from Spokane residents, then from across the country. Survivors began sharing their own stories online, using the hashtag her name was Melissa. One post read, "She gave me courage. I left my abuser last month. I think she saved my life even if we never met." Meanwhile, Melissa's children, Aiden and Lily, were legally adopted by Rachel. They now live in a quiet neighborhood near the lake, attending a local school and seeing a child therapist weekly. Rachel says they still ask about their mom. Lily keeps a picture of her by the bed, she shared on a podcast. She thinks she talks to angels. I tell her mom is one of them. But Melissa's impact didn't stop at awareness. It reshaped state law. In early 2024, Washington legislators introduced the Carter Bill, a bipartisan piece of legislation that fast-tracks protective orders and increases emergency housing support for women filing for divorce under high-risk domestic violence conditions. The bill mandates that divorce attorneys, upon identifying potential abuse, must refer clients to a state-run safety assessment. Melissa did everything right, said State Senator Denise Galen, one of the bill's sponsors. She followed the law. She tried to leave. And still, the system failed her. We won't let that happen again. The Carter bill passed unanimously in both state houses. Governor Jay Inslee signed it into law on March 12, 2024, exactly 1 year after Melissa filed for divorce. A plaque commemorating her now stands in the Washington State Capitol in Olympia. It reads, "In memory of Melissa Carter, whose courage gave rise to protection." For those closest to Melissa, the grief will never fully fade. But neither will her voice. Every time a woman walks into a shelter funded by the Carter Foundation, every time a survivor receives a protection order within 48 hours, every time a child is spared from witnessing what Aiden and Lily endured, Melissa lives again. In court, Eric Carter tried to erase her. But in her death, she became a symbol, a mother, a survivor, a warning. And she became a question we all must answer. How many more women have to die before we stop asking them to scream louder and start listening sooner? Melissa's story didn't end in that grave. Her voice lives in every woman she helps protect today. If her story moved you, share this video, comment your thoughts. Subscribe so we can keep telling the stories that matter, the ones that demand justice, and remind us that silence can be fatal.